Welcome everyone to this event entitled Reaching Zero with Renewables, What We Need to Accelerate and How Mission Innovation's missions can help. Now, this event is organized by the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. We're an intergovernmental organization founded over a decade ago. We work with our 163 member countries and the wider community to help them accelerate their energy transitions. Now, 2021 is a critical year for that energy transition and efforts to tackle climate change. It's an opportunity to take our collective efforts to the next level. Now, in the past year, and despite the pandemic, we've seen some positive signs. With continuing increases in renewable deployments, falling costs of renewables, more and more countries upping their ambition, many committing to net zero targets by mid-century, and importantly in NDC's more ambitious 2030 targets. Now, IRENA's global membership allows us to work with a diverse range of countries, and it means we get to see both the diversity of the challenges that different countries face, but also the many examples of common cause and shared endeavors. So in the next 45 minutes, we want to draw on that experience and give you a flavor of what we're learning about what needs to happen to deliver deep decarbonization of our energy systems, and how that might relate to international efforts to accelerate innovation. So to that end, we've assembled 5 senior IRENA analysts from the Innovation and Technology Center with expertise in many different facets of the transition. Dolf Gielen is Director of the Innovation and Technology Center. Emmanuelle Taibi is Head of the Power Sector Transformation Team. Francisco Boschel heads our Innovation Team. And Barbara Jinks leads our Green Gas and Delivery and End-Use team. I'm Paul Durrant. I lead our End-Use sectors teams and our bioenergy teams. Now, I hope between us we can have an informal discussion, hopefully a lively discussion. There's no Q&A, no long PowerPoint presentations, mostly just us discussing selected topics. To break it up a little and give you a break from just seeing our faces, I'll occasionally intersperse the discussions with a graph or some key stats, hopefully to provide you a bit of context about what we're discussing. Now, we're going to be drawing on multiple past and upcoming analytical projects and reports, plus our discussions and events with a host of experts around the world. In particular, however, we're drawing on our World Energy Transitions Outlook report, which was published in preview in March, and the full report is coming on the 16th of June. That publication, the veto, outlines a global pathway consistent with limiting global temperature rises to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius and bringing CO2 emissions to net zero by mid-century. Now, this is a step beyond our previous analysis, which was focused on a well below 2-degree pathway. And whilst the direction is the same, the pace and scale are notably larger and faster across all aspects of the energy transition. Everything needs to be turned up to 11. Now, if we are to have a fighting chance of delivering that ambition, we are going to need innovation to accelerate the pace, reduce costs, remove barriers. And we're going to need closer international cooperation. That's what we in IRENA are all about. And it's also why we are working closely with and strongly supporting the Mission Innovation Initiative, and why we're delighted to see Mission Innovation entering this important second phase of its life. I think that's enough by way of context. Let's dive into the energy transition itself. Now, to get us going, I'm going to ask Dolf to give us some of the headlines, paint the big picture, if you like, about what is needed for net zero. Dolf, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. As you said, with renewable technologies, we've seen very impressive progress in recent years. Last year was again a record year for renewable power capacity additions, despite the health pandemic. Last year, we've also seen around 4% electric vehicles in the vehicle fleet, in the car sales. And battery manufacturing capacity is ramping up very rapidly in response to that. And we see that even the traditional energy companies see the signs on the wall and are now actively participating in this transition. But it's clear that innovation is key, and it's the key factor that drives energy transition. And as you said, we launched our World Energy Transitions Outlook in March, and for the first time we looked at what is now needed for a 1.5 degree scenario for net zero by 2050. And we find that according to our analysis, the technologies needed are available. But we'll discuss a little bit later, in more detail in a moment. We also find that this transition is affordable. The investments need to increase, but by about 1/3. So it's not enormous increase. And in fact, the cost are much smaller than the benefits of such transition, also in economic terms. Now we see a number of key components, so strategies, if you like, for this transition. So renewable power is really critical. We need to ramp up, especially solar and wind. We need by 2050 10 times more renewable power than what we have in place today. And in combination with that, we need to electrify the end-use sector. So we need electric cars, electric trucks, heat pumps, etc. Everything electrified as much as possible. And where that is not possible, we need to think about clean energy carriers, other types of clean energy carriers, such as green hydrogen. So that's another key component to decarbonize the hard to decarbonize sectors, say the iron and steel industry, also aviation or shipping. So and we have a lot of dialogue with our members on these aspects. For example, on the green hydrogen, our collaborative framework especially focusing on also future trade of such commodity. So we need to further develop the technologies we have. We need to bring the cost down further. We need to make sure that the field of applications continues to widen. And for that, we need also an enabling infrastructure, enabling markets and regulations, new business models to allow the accelerated deployment of these technologies, because that is the main challenge we see at this moment. And so in that context, we have a lot of discussions with our members. We have our innovation weeks, we have innovation days in many countries where we talk to thousands of experts to hear what is now best practice around the world, what kind of specific needs and gaps do they identify, and that's what we bring to the table, and that's also how we can inform Mission Innovation. So it's about actual innovations that result in accelerated deployment, and I think now we'll dive a little bit deeper into a number of these innovations.
Yeah, I hope so. So yeah, thanks, Dolph. I think you paint the big picture excellently there. 1.5 degrees is a daunting challenge, and it's not just that end goal of net zero that's challenging, but it's the pace that we need to get there, and frankly what we need to achieve in the remaining 8 and a bit years to the end of this decade. You talked a bit about innovation beyond technology. That systemic innovation approach is critical. Francisco, can you unpack that a bit for us? What do we mean by that, and what are some of the key components?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I think it's very interesting what Dolph said in the sense that he said, okay, we have the technologies that we need, but innovation continues to be crucial. No? So how come if we have the technologies, why we need to continue to innovate? No? So actually, since 5 years ago, we have been tracking, okay, how is the development of the needed technologies for the energy transition? And we have identified actually more than 110 technologies that are critical for the energy transition. But the good news is that indeed, basically we have all those technologies, but of course at different stages of development. Some are already being commercial at large scale. Others are in the process to reaching commercialization. So in order to accelerate the uptake of all those technologies, then we continue to need innovation. But innovation goes far beyond the technology dimension. So as Dolph also mentioned, we need to integrate these technologies into energy systems. And for that, we need to innovate in the market design and regulations that can pull these technologies. We need new business models to enhance the business case for these technologies. We need new ways to operate the system in order to interlink all these technologies. So technology is important and will continue. We need to continue to innovate in order to reduce the cost. But now we need to focus more on this systemic innovation, which is the combination of these innovative pathways in technology plus market design, system operation, and business model. So for us, it's very important to distinguish that the energy transition will succeed if innovation succeeds as well. But innovation is not about invention. It's not about a handful of breakthrough technologies that will save the planet. No, it's about a number of elements, new elements that need to be integrated to really transform the energy system as we know it today. That's the only way we can really achieve this net zero by the mid of the century.
Thanks, Francisco. Absolutely. And I think we'll see some of that as we delve into some individual topics. So let's try and make it a bit more real by diving into some aspects. There's so much we could talk about and we haven't got the time. So we chose to pick 3 topics where technology-driven innovation as part of a systemic approach could play a major role. Our 3 are scaling up renewable power, in particular integrating higher shares of variable renewable energy. Number 2, renewable fuels and feedstocks, and by that we mean both hydrogen-based routes and biomass-based routes. And then thirdly, some of those tricky end-use sectors in transport and industry. So we're going to start with scaling up renewable power. I said at the outset we didn't want to bombard you with lots of PowerPoint presentations, so we've got a couple of charts and a couple of stats, but let me put the first of the charts up and we'll leave it up for 30 seconds or so you can digest it a bit, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So first slide up, silence for 30 seconds, and then back to us. Okay, you'll have seen in that chart how the role of electricity in total final energy consumption transforms between now and 2050. So let's dive into that a little bit more. Now, there's kind of 2 aspects to this. There's integrating higher levels of renewables and expanding the use of electricity in end-use applications, i.e. electrification. So, Emanuele, can you kick us off with this? Can you give us a bit of context as to how electricity can grow and what some of the challenges might be?
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, I think there are 2 parts to the discussion. One is the direction that we already see happening in the power sector today, and the other one is the acceleration that we need. So first of all, you've seen the animation, and that shows this yellow part growing already as we speak. So every year we're seeing an increase in electrification. Main point being that there are new technologies coming to play in the end-use sectors that can make use of the renewable power that is coming to the supply side. Now, that has to accelerate significantly, and what the chart basically says is that if we are today at around 20% of electricity in total final energy supply, we need to get to 50% in 2050, and that is a very quick acceleration of electrification. The other part of the chart that is also growing well, the largest share of new installation for power capacity has been renewables for some years already, has to go even faster. And by that, what we mean is that today a quarter of electricity comes from renewables. We need to get to 90% at least by 2050. And that is also essentially increasing the share in a total amount of electricity that is growing because of electricity. So it's a compounded challenge. And the third part of the equation is flexibility. So how do we make sure that this new system will be reliable in addition to cost effective? 2 parts to that discussion. First of all, what we can see already today is that solutions are emerging. And again, the role of innovation is key to make sure that these systems are becoming increasingly easy to operate. So digitalization and many other solutions already exist on the market today to make sure that a system with 2/3 of the electricity coming from solar and wind can be operated reliably and cost effectively. And the other part of the discussion is, what else do we need? And really, there is a whole set of things that can be done to make the system optimized for the future and be ready for that. We have 30 years, but we have the solutions today. So I think with this, I would hand it over back to Paul.
Yeah, actually, maybe Francisco can jump in on this because, yeah, we have many of the solutions now, but there's still scope for improvement and some new things emerging. Francisco, what's on the horizon?
Thanks, Paul. Well, the first thing is that, as mentioned by Emanuele, electricity will be the king of the future in terms of energy carriers. And we have to be prepared to electrify everything to the largest extent, as mentioned by Dolph again. But that has to be done in a smart way. And what do we mean by a smart way? What we mean is that, as Emanuele said, let's take the case of electromobility, for example. In a Paris Agreement aligned scenario, we may need to consume by the mid of this century per year around 12,000 terawatt hours for electric cars and trucks, etc. To put it in context, today, the total electricity demand in the planet is 20,000 terawatts. So it means that by 2050, basically half of all the electricity we consume now for all applications will go just to electric cars. So the amount of new renewable electricity capacity that will be needed is huge. But the other aspect is how these load profiles would look like, when these cars will be charging, when these cars will be idling. And this is very important because that has an impact on the investments and the cost of this electrification. If everyone charges their cars at the same time, you will need much more cables, much more transformers, etc. But if you can somehow balance that in a controlled manner, then that cost is reduced. And this is not trivial because we have done an analysis for electric vehicles, and the ratio between a dumb and a smart electrification in terms of investment is 1 to 10, so an order of magnitude. So either in a country you invest in the next 10 years, $200 million for infrastructure for electric cars, or $2 billion. And of course, all those costs will be passed through the different stakeholders and actors in the chain. So we need to be smart. But be smart, again, means innovation, not only in the technology, so the batteries, the charging point, the vehicle-to-grid technology, but also, for example, the tariffs structure, whether they will be dynamic, will be time-of-use tariff. The business model, how we attract the investors to put public charging points in the right places. So we need really to innovate in all these different aspects, the regulation, the business model, the way distribution system operators will control these new loads in order to have really smart electrification. And we are afraid that we do not have still a full understanding of the synergies and how to interconnect all these elements. So now we are working on that in an analysis which is called the Innovation Landscape Report for the Smart Electrification, to try to help our policymakers and member countries to see how to do this electrification in a smart way, which at the end means lowest system cost while maximizing the benefits to integrate more renewables in the system.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. Emanuele mentioned that we see renewable share of total power generation capacity rising to about 90% by 2050. But I think the number to really emphasize in that is that the share of variable renewable energy must also grow substantially. I think our scenario has us reaching 63% of generation capacity by 2050. That's a very high share of variable sources like wind and solar. Do you see these flexibility options that we're talking about here and the package being able to cope with that? Emanuele or Francisco?
Thank you, Paul. This is a very good point. And indeed, it goes back to Dolph's point that we do have the technologies today. So we are seeing front runners being able to operate system with these shares already today. And of course, there are very many specificities to the operation of a power system from one country that might not be immediately transferable to another. But what we want to emphasize, the technologies exist, and the combination of technologies will be really important. So if you think about what can be happening at the daily level to balance the day with so many solar and wind generators in the system, you have the electric vehicles Francisco mentioned, you have a very rapid deployment of batteries, both behind the meter and at the utility scale. You have increasingly demand side flexibility coming to play, and you might have significant amounts of electrolyzers. And these will all be competing sources of flexibility that they all try to purchase the electricity when it's cheapest. And then, of course, some of those that can generate as well come back to the system when the prices are higher. And this is just at the daily level. If you start looking at the weekly, seasonal, and annual level, different technologies have different roles to play, but they're all available today. Some are more deployed than others. So what you see in between the day and the year clearly is the important new role of hydropower and pumped hydro storage to balance the seasonality of renewables. And then finally, what is the new and hot topic, somehow giving a preview to where we are heading, is of course the seasonal storage of renewables through green hydrogen.
We'll come to green hydrogen in a moment. So yeah, thanks. So I think what we're saying here is that the innovation is in the integration of those multiple different components and the differences between energy systems around the world, and the need to create solutions that work in the local context is where the innovation will come in the years ahead. Mission Innovation is launching a mission on this very topic, and I think we'd agree that this is an area where there is still substantial scope for further innovation along those systemic lines. We better move on in a moment, but I wonder, have we missed anything here? Is there anything really sort of crucial that you feel we would want to communicate to the audience? Anyone?
Yeah, maybe Paul, to add well, what you said, we work a lot with our members in assessing this, in making these high-level concepts tangible to them. So we work with State Grid China in what does this flexibility now mean for the Chinese grid, which is the largest grid in the world. Look at specific Chinese cities and what can you do there to electrify the demand side. Emanuele and his team looked at islands, for example, Antigua and Barbuda wants to go 100% renewable. And how do you integrate electromobility with that? Uruguay is another example of a front runner country that has hydro and wind and now wants to use that to electrify its transport sector and then maybe even export some green commodities. So you need to look at the specifics of the power systems to find the optimal solutions. But all the cases we've looked at so far, there are solutions and there are economically and technically viable solutions for this energy transition.
Excellent, thanks. I think that's an excellent point to finish on for this section. Unfortunately, we better move on. So the 1.5 degree scenario has us reaching 51% of total final energy consumption from electricity by 2050. But of course, that still leaves 49% where we need other solutions. So let's talk a little bit now about renewable fuels. So this time I haven't got a chart for you. I've got some stats which are intended to give you a sense of the frankly daunting scale of the challenge ahead of us. So perhaps we'll put that up on the screen, give you some time to digest it, and then we'll dive into the topic. I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of the scale, and if you want to understand that a bit more, do take a look at the veto report where we unpack that in more detail. Let's talk about those two different routes then. So we have the hydrogen-based route and the biomass-based route. Now they've both got a major role to play. We'll talk about end-use applications in the third part of this session. So let's focus here on supply and distribution. And let's start with hydrogen, perhaps. So, Barbara, I wonder if you could kick us off on this. Can you give us a bit of a sense of where we're at with hydrogen, where we need to get to, and what some of the challenges are?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. The key challenge is we're very heavily reliant on fossil fuels at the moment for energy as feedstock for chemicals, and also feedstock for liquid fuels, and gas as a fuel for heat and power. And the challenge is how to reduce that. Our World Energy Transition Outlook estimates that we need to reduce fossil fuels by 75% overall to reach the 1.5 scenario. And the challenge is how to do that. It's doable technically, and as Francisco and Dolph have said, that the technology exists, the innovation exists. It's more systems, policy, regulation, and the willingness to make the change that'll make us successful. After energy efficiency, electrification, and change in behavior, there are some areas that cannot be decarbonized, they cannot be electrified, and we need to look for alternative fuels, such as in aviation, some chemical processes, shipping, heavy-duty vehicles, and in some cases, heating for buildings. And there are opportunities where hydrogen provides an opportunity as an alternative fuel, because it can be burnt and it is also a feedstock. And just like electrons going down and electricity flow, hydrogen is an energy carrier in a gas flow. So it has multiple, it gives us opportunities to deliver renewable energy. There are two types of hydrogen. There are many types, but there's two categories. One is using fossil fuels, splitting fossil methane to produce hydrogen. But this takes energy and it produces either a carbon dioxide gas or solid carbon. So it does not deliver the decarbonization that we need. Green hydrogen is where we use renewable electricity to split water through a process of electrolysis. And when it's combusted, it only produces water. So green hydrogen is a carbon-free energy source and an energy carrier. And in the World Energy Transition Outlook, we estimate that 2/3 of the hydrogen that's needed in the end, which amounts to 12% of total energy use, can be green hydrogen. And that's how we achieve 10% of the carbon reductions that we need in these hard to decarbonize areas. There is a fair amount of research and innovation going on in industries. For example, in glassmaking, they're looking at up to 80% electrification of the process, and in a project called Future Furnace, and 20% hydrogen. We know that there's developments in green steel and other areas, and commercial and residential burners can burn hydrogen to various degrees. So again, the technology is there, and we need policy and regulation and willingness to make it happen. One of the key things, of course, is the cost, to bring down the cost of green hydrogen to be cost competitive. And here I'll hand over to Emanuele to talk a bit more about the trends that we're seeing in that area. Thanks, Emanuele.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Well, really taking it from here, the message we gave on power is that, well, we are already seeing a lot of renewable power technologies coming to the power system every year, but we need to accelerate that. When it comes to producing molecules or green molecules from water by splitting it with renewable electricity, we do see this renewable electricity at the price points where we need to be already today in the best locations. We've seen prices for renewable power approaching $10 a megawatt hour, well below 20 in many locations, not everywhere, but certainly in the best projects. And this is 2021. So we can still expect further reduction in cost in the next 30 years. The other part of the equation is the technologies you need to produce the green hydrogen to split water. It's a well-established technology, but for different purposes. So electrolysis is the technology used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and has been used in the chemical industry and in other sectors like fertilizers for a long time. The point there is the scale. So changing the purpose of this technology to become the producer of, say, 8% of total final energy supply in 2050 from zero today, it means going from factories that produce a few megawatt of these units per year to many, many gigawatt per year. So we need to reach an end game of about 5 terawatt of installed capacity, 5,000 gigawatt while today we are not even at 1 gigawatt. So the scale there is daunting. However, that's again going back to the innovation point. Technologies exist. They are relatively straightforward compared to more complex options, such as capturing the CO2 and storing it for a long period of time underground. And what we need is to speed up. And so innovation in all senses, to get processes in place to produce these units faster, produce these units cheaper, produce these units more efficiently, and be able to do that at scale and in pace for the next 30 years. So what we want to see is in the next 5 to 10 years to reach a competitive price point for green hydrogen in an increasing number of locations. And this could kick off a global market.
And if I may follow up, Emanuele, and there lies another challenge, how to get the hydrogen from where it is produced to where it's needed. And we're seeing there's a lot of work and strategies for transporting hydrogen as a gas through pipelines. And of course, you can use the existing gas grid for that or build new pipelines, and you could transport hydrogen as a gas across thousands of kilometers with very little or zero energy losses. And it's estimated that on average, where there's an existing gas grid, 75% of that grid can be reassigned with little investment and effort. And that brings the opportunities for transporting gas across land. It makes it more feasible. And just as with LPG and LNG and coal ships around the planet, green hydrogen can be converted into ammonia and transported by ships. And the ships also can use the ammonia as a fuel. And if it's green ammonia, that's carbon free. So there's great challenges, but great opportunities to trade green hydrogen around the world.
Yeah, thanks both. I mean, you paint a picture there that looks pretty attractive, and hydrogen's been getting a lot of attention recently. But as we were saying, that the price needs to fall dramatically and the production capacity needs to scale up dramatically. Do you see signs that that is happening? Are we on the right path for that? And is there anything we need to be doing more of? Almost certainly there is.
Emanuele or me? Maybe I'll make a comment, and Emanuele, you can come in after. We see a lot of enthusiasm and pre-feasibility studies, in particular in areas like Brazil and Chile and Australia, Spain and Portugal, Middle East, Northern Africa, where there is an abundance of renewable energy and the vision to transport green hydrogen or green ammonia. And there are one project in particular from Australia where transport agreements and supply agreements are being negotiated. But it's very early days. But again, it's feasible. If you think of how the gas LNG industry has ramped up, in particular over the last 10, 15 years, it can be done. For that, we need strong international cooperation and collaboration, and that's where organizations like ARENA are really important, and Mission Innovation, to collaborate across countries and regions. And dialogue is essential, for example, on our collaborative framework for green hydrogen, where we have transparency in ideas and learn from each other and share. But Emanuele, maybe you'd like to comment more on the locations and where the cheaper hydrogen is.
And I want to make sure we talk about biomass. So quickly, if you can, Emanuele.
Yeah,
I'll be very quick. So I think the point has been made. We have a collaborative framework that discusses topics around green hydrogen, and really what we want to focus on is to make sure that the enabling conditions are in place for both public and private sector to put in place the infrastructure we need. And infrastructure is the pipes and ships that Barbara talked about, but also the regulatory frameworks and the certification systems that allow us to understand where is this H2 molecule coming from before we consume it, assuming it's green. So I think we have a big challenge, but there is a lot of momentum, both politically and business oriented momentum. And the ambition is to be faster than the last year's announcement. And this has been a continuous increase of how soon we can get competitive, how quickly we can scale up. It seems to get closer and closer. So I think it's the time to see if we can really make it. And we offer a platform for that conversation to happen, and look forward to sharing insights as we move along this conversation. Back to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks very much. And obviously our collaborative framework is working hand in hand with other organizations, including the new Mission Innovation Mission. So we've talked a lot about hydrogen, and that seems to be what most of the world is talking about at the moment. You know, you can't turn around without a conversation about hydrogen, but the somewhat overlooked, unloved child of this energy transition is biomass. So I'm going to talk about biomass for 30 seconds or so, and then unfortunately we better move on. But you know, so I mean, in our 1.5 degree scenario, biomass is about double the energy in energy terms, the hydrogen component, although both are very substantial. So biomass is critical in multiple different parts of the energy transition, and we see it needs to grow from around 53 exajoules now to 153 by 2050, a tripling, in other words, reaching about 18% of final energy use. Now, that level of biomass supply is towards the high end of what we and others have estimated the global sustainably sourceable biomass supply is. So to the best of our understanding right now, we can source that amount of biomass sustainably. And by that, I mean ways that don't cause significant environmental, social, or economic harm in the sourcing of that biomass. It's doable, but it's quite challenging. And so a much more attention to biomass supply chains, to diversifying our sources of biomass, particularly looking at exploration of residuals and waste from other processes that we can source more sustainably. Matching biomass supply with end uses, and we'll talk about end uses in a second, is critical as well. And we see the need for innovation across that dimension in terms of diversifying that supply, as I say, and diversifying the end use sectors. So yeah, we see this as having a critical role, but we're a little daunted by the pace and scale that's needed. So again, innovation. And back to my earlier point, it's not being talked about enough, frankly, in the international discussions on this. Hydrogen is rightly getting a lot of attention, but biomass isn't. And we need to raise the level of debate and raise the nuance in that debate if we're going to deliver on the transition. That's probably enough on those two topics. Unfortunately, we have to move on. Does anybody have a burning point they want to make before we look at our final session?
Absolutely, Paul. Absolutely. In terms of greening the gas grid, biomethane has such an important role to play, especially where the resources are localized and the need is local, because you can put biomethane down the existing gas system with no changes. It's just CH4 like any other methane. So it gives us huge opportunities. The key challenge is the sustainability. That was just my point. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent point. We better move on. So one last chart from us for you to digest. We'll put it up on the screen. You can absorb it. We're now looking at the end use sectors. So we'll give you a flavor of what some of the building blocks are for those end use sectors. Great. I'm not giving you much time to absorb it because we're short on time now, and for colleagues we've got about 6 minutes left, but let's talk briefly therefore about some of the so-called hard to decarbonize sectors. There's lots we could talk about here, but let's focus in on a couple of sectors where the challenges are significant. Let's talk about aviation and shipping on the transport side, and a little bit about some of those energy intensive sectors in industry. So Dolph, let's start with transport. Can you give us a sort of a bit of an overview of what the decarbonisation pathway is for shipping and aviation?
So we see in aviation an important role for biofuels, especially advanced biofuels. In shipping, it's an interesting case where ammonia and methanol are receiving a lot of attention, and Francisco and his team are currently looking into that. That is one of the growth markets for ammonia. And we see, for example, in shipping, there is now an intent of 5% net zero fuels by 2030. So there is a lot of attention for these sectors right now, and we think it's moving in the right direction.
Thanks very much. And Francisco, your name was mentioned there. Ammonia, methanol, how do they fit?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So indeed, so the shipping sector is looking into how to decarbonize their fuels, and actually derivatives from green hydrogen are getting more attention because of the progress in renewable electricity cost reduction and interest in production of green hydrogen at large scale. Now, still the uncertainty is, let's say, how these two potential fuels will complement each other in the future. And I think there is still an area where there are some pros and cons. In the case of methanol, one of the issues is how to source the carbon that is needed to produce it. In the case of ammonia, you don't need the carbon, but it's more about the technologies that can use ammonia directly to propel a vessel. But all these issues are technically progressing. There are already prototypes available, so that's not really an issue. On the contrary, what we see, and I think Dolph mentioned it already, is some encouraging signals. From the demand side, more and more of the large shipping companies are joining the industry associations, the Methanol Institute and the Ammonia Energy Association, with whom we are partnering for this analysis, are becoming members of these associations recently. So it's showing that they are interested to accelerate, let's say, the deployment of these fuels for the shipping sector. The other thing that is interesting, and maybe here I will give a little bit of a sneak preview of our ongoing work on ammonia, is that the question, for example, with the blue ammonia also, so the production of ammonia from fossil fuel, but capturing the carbon, no? Something that some people are talking about. But if we see at the interest nowadays, so what are the projects in the pipeline of green ammonia and blue ammonia? Clearly, most of the projects now are going towards green ammonia, not really blue ammonia. So this idea of blue to be a transition towards green now is being questioned, I would say. Because what we see is that people are saying we don't need a transition to blue. We can go directly to green because electricity from renewables is becoming very cheap. Plans for green hydrogen production are moving from megawatt scale to gigawatt scale for single production units, etc. So it's clear that these signals to the market may see some impact. We see many projections saying like ammonia can play an important role between 2040 and 2050, where we see a boom of ammonia, but actually it may be the case that we see this boom earlier if this continues in this way.
Excellent. Thanks, Francisco. I wish we could unpack that a little bit more, but as I say, you know, report on methanol on our website already, report on ammonia coming shortly. I'd like to talk about aviation, but we don't have time. So I'm just going to very briefly mention that the leading candidate for decarbonizing in aviation right now is biojet fuels. We might see synthetic kerosene and hydrogen, possibly electricity playing roles, but it's going to be biojet that dominates. Tiny amounts produced right now, much more needs to be done to scale that up, and we have a report on that coming, and indeed there's another side event at this Mission Innovation Ministerial talking about that. So if you want to know more, take a look at that one. Let's talk in our last 3 minutes or so then about industry. So Dolph, I'm going to come to you on this one again. There are probably three big sectors that energy use: chemicals, cement, and iron and steel. We can't unpack them all in 3 minutes, but can you give us a bit of a flavor on the chemical sector, which is probably the trickiest?
Yes, indeed, quite complex. There is, let's say, from an energy perspective, there's ammonia, of which we already talked a lot, and there's petrochemicals, so plastics, etc. That is a very particular sector because the bulk of the oil and gas at the moment ends up as feedstock. So in the plastic, and it's only released when the plastic is incinerated. So that is a very particular setup, and the solutions are therefore very particular. You mentioned bioenergy. before, but biofeedstocks can play a critical role in decarbonizing this sector. Circular economy concepts are very important in this sector. So recycle more plastic is important. And of course, we need to also work on lifestyle and use patterns and try to minimize, for example, the use of packaging materials. So higher quality products and more sustainable products are the solution.
Yeah, thanks, Dolph. One thing we haven't talked about so far is carbon capture and carbon dioxide removal. And our scenario, as is true of most scenarios for 1.5 degrees, requires some negative emission technologies, some technologies that actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere rather than simply preventing CO2 being released. And lead amongst those is bioenergy with CCS. So some of the issues I described earlier about ensuring sustainable supply chains for biomass and ensuring that we're not causing wider harms while sourcing that biomass is part of that challenge, but equally you've got to put that alongside the state of CCS right now, which, whilst it's an established technology, is not a technology that is deployed widely and is this technology that's made very little progress in the last decade. But if we're going to see BECCS in particular take off, then we're going to need progress both on the supply side of biomass and on, frankly, many more demonstration projects integrating biomass with CCS. So again, it feels like another area ripe for innovation attention. We better draw this to a close because our time is almost up. Does anybody have any burning comments they want to make on what we've just been talking about, industry and transport? And then we'll move to a wrap up. No, I'm sure there's many things you want to say, but not in 30 seconds. So thanks, folks. That was a very quick canter through what is clearly an involved topic, but I hope we've given our audience a flavor of some of the key components, and we've given you some pointers about where you could look for more information. Just by way of wrap up, let's just bring it back to innovation in terms of where the priorities lie. And I'll ask each of you for a sort of 15-second, what's your key tip on what the priorities for innovation might be? And perhaps we can put up our final slide to finish with on that. So just whilst you're getting going, let me start with moderator's prerogative here. So for me, the critical priority in driving innovation is that decision makers have the knowledge and confidence, both of those things, necessary to make the major investment decisions they'll need to make in the 2030s and 40s. And the key way of doing that is to ensure we have many more test and demonstration projects, pilot projects at scale, and crucially, we gather and share the information from those widely. So people have that knowledge and confidence. So that for me is the priority across many of the technologies we've been talking about. Anybody else want to jump in? What's your priority?
Well, Dolph.
Please, Dolph, and then Barbara.
I mean, what we've learned from the V2 exercise and what we learn over and again from similar systems analysis studies is that there's a number of topics where policymakers and also the general audience likes to focus. I mean, the ones at the moment are renewable power and green hydrogen, clearly. And these are important topics and we need these. But there are certain other pockets of significant emissions where there is far less attention and perhaps where some additional effort can bring quick wins. So a key message for me is continue to look across the whole spectrum and try to find these sweet spots.
Thanks, Dolph. We're out of time, so unless my colleagues have anything burning to say, I think we better wrap up. Thank you to my colleagues for excellent comments. Thanks to the Mission Innovation team for giving us this platform. I hope you all feel that you've gained some insights from that. Do check out the publications page of our website for many more insights. Congratulations to Mission Innovation on launching its next phase of work, and we look forward to future collaboration. Have a good day.